Thank you.
Right. It's exactly age 30. And so hopefully at least one aspect of our meeting today will happen as planned. Good morning, everybody. My name is Scott Rogers. I am the chair of the West Central Wisconsin Rail Coalition. This is our annual meeting, which we take the opportunity to bring a lot of information for our members and other people who are interested about what's happening with passenger rail in not only in our region, but in the country and how that might affect us getting passenger trains in the as near future as we can for the West Central Wisconsin region, which is Eau Claire, Menominee, Baldwin, and Hudson, and the corridor of the Twin Cities and going west as well. So a couple things about our meeting today. First of all, as Mark said, Mark Quam is our Secretary Treasurer. He's operating the Zoom meeting. One of the advantages, I know a lot of you are from other places and joining us maybe in Eau Claire or as far away as some other part of the country. And Mark happens to be in Colorado, and that's one of the great things we can do is do this sort of thing remotely. We had planned to make this a hybrid meeting, however, and what has happened to us is Chippewa Valley Technical College is an ex officio member of our commission. They were hosting our meeting, but because it's 20 degrees out below zero out right now with a 30-degree below wind chill, they, along with most other schools in the area today, have canceled classes and closed their buildings. So we went to Plan B. We're actually originating from the Eau Claire Area Chamber of Commerce. We have a few of our leadership here, but we did not have near as big a room as we would have at CVTC. So we made it online only for most folks. So you'll be meeting speakers as we go along today. Just a couple of reminders. We would ask you to for sure mute, and you may even want to turn your camera off when you're not speaking or asking a question. When it comes time, we will have some time during the program to open it up for questions. So our first choice is going to have you raise your hand, but we'll try to accommodate you whether you can do that or not. Also, we are recording this, and then I'll just remind the folks, there's a few of us here in the room, which you can't see on camera, but we have great microphones in here, and they are very, very sensitive. So if you whisper to the person next to you, it probably will pick up on these microphones. So just be aware of that as well. So it's great for the speaking as well. So I'm going to share my screen, and we have a presentation we're going to hear from, and I'm going to talk a little bit about how we're going to do the meeting today and what our schedule is going to be. So I'm going to make sure, Mark, is everybody seeing this? Are you seeing this?
Yes, Scott, I can see your PowerPoint.
All right.
Yep.
So this is a little bit of information about the Rail Coalition. I encourage you, if you're not already a member, you might want to consider going to our website and joining. And then this is our schedule for today. We're going to have Jim Mathews from the Rail Passengers Association with us. He is here in person. One reason we didn't postpone the meeting is we have out-of-state speakers from as far away as Washington, D.C. and South Dakota, and they were here already when we found out the building was going to be closed. So we're going ahead with sort of a hybrid meeting today. So we're going to have an update on St. Paul Union Depot. We're going to give you an update on bringing trains to West Central Wisconsin, what's happening there. We're going to talk about long distance trains that will be running someday to the Pacific Northwest. We'll get updates from Wisconsin DOT and Minnesota DOT on their projects. And then at the very end, we're going to have an extremely short business meeting for the Rail Coalitions. So I'm going to move on to the very next thing, and our first speaker. And I won't spend a lot of time introducing Jim, but Jim Mathews has been president and CEO of the Rail Passengers Association in Washington, D.C. for 11 years now. And he's going to give us some information on the state of play in Washington, and then why passenger trains are good for us economically. So Jim, welcome, and we'll turn it over to you, and you just push that down arrow when you ready to change.
All right, great. So thank you so much. Thanks for having me. You know, I remember I spoke to this group last year, the year before last, and I said, next time I'll be here in person. We'll get to see everybody. I'm sorry it didn't work out, but
A few of us.
I'm really, thanks for the invitation. I'm really glad to be here. It's nice to see everyone here. And Mark, as always, one of these days I do actually get to shake your hand in person, but thanks for everything that you do as well. I'm going to be, Scott asked me to talk a little bit about the state of play in DC, where we're at.
Sorry.
And I always have to begin by noting that I am offering my observations here as a political professional. We are a nonprofit, we're a 501c3. We do not have partisan stake. So any discussion I may have with you about tactics or strategies or outcomes, this is our look at the chessboard. This is looking at the chessboard and seeing what we see. This is not saying that we are endorsing or opposing any particular politician or legislation. So with that, for those who don't know, we have been around since 1967. We are the leading voice for more than 40 million rail passengers in the United States. And we do our work because it makes communities safer, makes them more accessible, it makes them more productive. It improves the lives of everyone who lives, works, studies, and plays in communities all across America. Back when I had hair, that was me before the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee. We work with local, state, federal, tribal leaders, planners, local legislators, congressional members, staff. We do economic benefits studies, quite a few of them, white papers, educational materials, model legislation, bill language. The infrastructure package that passed in 2021, we contributed 25 pages to that, to the rail title. We testify before Congress and agencies. We vote in advisory bodies. We basically carry the voice of the passenger into these official spaces. And more often than not, we are the only voice of the passenger in these official spaces. At the same time, we mobilized a grassroots network of 127,000 donors, members, and supporters nationwide. Our goals are pretty simple: to improve and expand conventional intercity and regional passenger train services, support higher speed rail initiatives, increase connectivity among all forms of transportation. So that's buses, it's ride share, it's bike share, all that first mile, last mile work, and also to ensure safety for our country's trains and for those who operate. I want to remind everybody of where we are. These orange bars represent the rail funding for passenger rail initiatives in the Investment in Infrastructure and Jobs Act, so known as the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. The little blue bars are where we've been in the 5 years before that law. And those little blue bars are kind of what the state of play had been for decades. So when we use words like historic and transformative, this is what we mean. And everyone has seen this slide a bunch of times, but I think it's worth just repeating. This is an incredible amount of money that was earmarked for passenger rail investment in the United States, much more than had ever been spent at one time on passenger rail in this country. It came at a moment when people want trains. Republicans want trains, Democrats want trains, nonpartisan people want trains, old people want trains, young people want trains. 78% of Americans support passenger rail investment of $100 billion or more. 95% of Democrats and Democratic-leaning voters, 61% of Republicans and Republican-leaning voters. A slight majority support high-speed rail. So we have broad support for passenger rail in this country. So as they say, passenger rail is having a moment. So let's talk just briefly about the election. We lost some allies on both sides of the aisle. The Senate, we lost Bob Casey, we lost Sherrod Brown, we lost John Tester. The interesting thing there about Montana, though, Tester was defeated by Tim Sheehy. But Tim had ties to the Big Sky Passenger Rail Authority. He's already publicly supported the proposed new service. I actually remember being on a Big Sky Rail Authority Zoom call many years ago, and Tim Sheehy was on that call. So what we've got in the Senate is we lost someone who was in the majority and supported passenger rail. And we picked up someone who is now in the majority who supports passenger rail. So whenever you got someone on that side of the ledger, you're doing okay. In the House, one of the interesting losses for me anyway was Congressman Molinaro. He lost to Josh Riley in New York 19. The House GOP tried to send a THUD appropriations bill through that would have gutted Amtrak service. It would have been 93% cuts to the Northeast Corridor, about 2/3 of cuts across the board to Amtrak. And there was a lot of pressure from Speaker Johnson and others to push this through. And 7 Republicans with Amtrak service locked arms and said, no, we're not voting for this bill. Now, why is that important? Well, remember, the majority in the House at the time was not very large. And all it took was 7 Republicans saying, no, we're not doing it. And that tanked the bill. And it was a lot of pressure because I spoke to a lot of pro-Amtrak Republicans in the House, some of whom were subcommittee chairs and that sort of thing. And they were told, hey, you can say what you want, but in the end, you're going to have to vote for this bill or I'll take your gavel. And these folks didn't have a gavel to lose. So they held firm and that bill never passed. Why do I talk about majorities and votes and numbers? Well, because they make a difference. In this current post-election environment, we have Republicans who've been plucked from the House to be in the Trump administration. So as of now, today, at least until April in the special election, the House GOP majority is 1 vote. They can lose 1 vote. Ties don't win. So you'll have a special election to replace Elise Stefanik from upstate New York, from North Country where I grew up. Mike Waltz in Florida, he's going to NSA. Matt Gaetz' situation is interesting. He was withdrawn as the attorney general pick, but he said he's not going to take his seat that he won. So there'll be a special election for Matt Gaetz' seat. Senator Rubio is cruising to confirmation as Secretary of State. J.D. Vance, his seat, same thing. The governor will appoint that. That's a fairly safe appointment. I want to point this one out really quick. In the Senate leadership elections, you had 3 folks who were contesting that. Senator Thune, Senator Cornyn, and Senator Scott. Senator Thune could be viewed as kind of the institutionalist choice. He was a very reliably rail-friendly vote, supported Amtrak legislation, even when he doesn't have Amtrak service in his state. He's been pretty consistent. He won that vote. In the secret ballot, Thune got 29 votes, Cornyn got 24, and Senator Scott got 0, which when you're in a secret ballot, you can kind of get a sense of what the temperature and the tone is in the chamber. I read that to suggest that the Senate is more interested in institutionalist views rather than in endorsing, radical policies. We'll see. Senator Thune has said he's going to maintain the power of the filibuster in Senate rules. And that also is huge because that means that any one senator can hold up a bill and that may need to happen. But as I said, post-election, the House majority is very, very slender. You have a single-digit margin of control right now, at least until April. And got 60 brand new congressmen coming to Capitol Hill. And we're going to have to educate all of them on passenger rail. So the calendar looms. New Congress met, they were sworn in, they started working, and immediately ran into a buzzsaw of crises. We have the debt limit. We are already, as of today, into what Secretary Yellen called extraordinary measures, which is how you keep the bills getting paid. The inauguration was yesterday. There were a flurry of executive orders. Many of those are going to go to court because they are probably not going to withstand a legal challenge. So you've got all of this kind of stuff happening. And meanwhile, we're all worried about passenger rail. I don't think passenger rail is going to hit the radar in that kind of environment for a little while. Typically, in February, you'd see an administration put out a new budget. Probably not going to see that this year. And if the negotiations fail in debt limit and some of the other things that are on the Hill right now, you're looking at a potential government shutdown in mid-March. So here's what's on the White House's agenda. You've got to get your team in place. You've got all those executive orders. You've got to finalize the fiscal 25 omnibus appropriation, which is something that the GOP really doesn't like. They don't like omnibus appropriation bills. They would much rather see individual appropriations bills the way that God and the Constitution intended. And we haven't had that in a long, long time. But in order to get just the rest of fiscal 25 going, they're going to have to do an omnibus. That'll be a continuing resolution, but they also need to extend the debt limit. There's a lot on the table. They still want to do the immigration stuff, which is clearly very complicated and controversial. There's always the tariffs to worry about. They've got to extend the Trump tax cuts, a few dozen other things. And then finally, you come down to US DOT priorities for rail programs. I think we're going to be number 211 on the priority list here. On the other hand, President Trump has said he's going to do a big infrastructure announcement at 4 o'clock today. I have no idea what that will be. So you've heard the phrase personnel is policy. So part one, this is Sean Duffy. Folks here in Wisconsin, I'm sure know Sean Duffy better than maybe the rest of our audience does. If you look at his voting record in Congress, it was pretty seriously anti-rail. I'm not going to read all these. You don't need to read all these unless you want to. But these are all the votes that we counted that were against passenger rail. The 113th Congress, the 114th Congress, 115th Congress, eliminating Amtrak spending, even prohibited help for Brightline when Brightline was trying to get itself. So this was not just about Amtrak. This was about private railroads as well. Very reflexively anti-passenger rail. So when we saw that nomination, we got to work and we thought, uh-oh, this could be bad. So personnel was policy, part two. Here is his confirmation hearing last week. That's the Democratic was the chair and is now the ranking member of the Senate Commerce Committee, Maria Cantwell from Washington. Senator Cantwell and Sean Duffy having a moment. And he committed to Senator Cantwell that he was going to continue work on projects with existing grants. So one of the things we were concerned about was clawbacks on the grant programs that are already out, Corridor ID and some of the others. And Duffy told Cantwell in his hearing last week, no, if it's underway, it'll keep going. The one thing he said that we were really pleased with is one of our legislative priorities for the next few years. He said he'd heard from senators that projects are moving too slowly and he would work to speed delivery of projects. Well, hallelujah, that's terrific. We're very much in favor of that. He committed to Senator Schatz. He was going to keep political considerations out of the new grant applications. He agreed with Senator Moran on rail service in rural communities. Another win. He told Senator Kim in New Jersey that he'd continue the Giant Gateway project, which potentially was under the gun. He basically said, look, I was in a district that didn't have Amtrak service. My constituents told me in town halls that they don't like Amtrak, so I voted the way that they wanted me to. Now I'm Secretary of Transportation. I have a different portfolio. I have different responsibilities, and this is how I'm going to be. That's a very encouraging message. And we hope he sticks to that. It's a very encouraging message. So let's go back to where we are in the must pays. You have the tax cut extension. They're going to have to find a way to pay for that. Sean Duffy just said he didn't see a reason why we should be going after existing grants, but that math don't math, as they say. You got a lot of money that you're going to have to come up with to pay for those tax cuts. and to pay for what's going to be in the omnibus bill. They're going to play a lot of games with counting things differently, putting different dates on things. We'll see how far they get. But $10 billion of unallocated IIJA money is a very, very tempting target when you're facing this kind of thing. I want to talk just for a second about the majorities. Those little like yellow dots will show you independents who basically caucus with the Democrats. So there's your majorities, the Senate and the House. I would point out to you that in the Senate, particularly with an active filibuster, it takes 60 votes to do anything. So you don't really have a working majority in the Senate. In the House, the numbers say 220 to 215. That's a pretty thin margin as it is. But as I said, at least until April in the special elections, it's really one. So the idea that you're going to ram anything through on any of those previous slides that I showed you is probably not going to happen, right? Because you're going to have Democrats support it and cooperate with you. And this particular crop of Democrats is not inclined to cooperate. All right. Surface transportation reauthorization. That's what comes next after the bipartisan infrastructure law. That's supposed to expire in 2026. The odds of that happening in 2026 are very, very, very low. Go back to this. Anything that you try to write to replace the bipartisan infrastructure law is going to have to get through that gauntlet. It's not going to happen. So the open questions, $10 billion remaining in the Fed-State partnership program. $1 billion was supposed to have been awarded for fiscal 24 for Fed-State Partnership National Network. There were supposed to be applications by December 16th. Many, many folks did apply for those funds. Are they going to make those awards right now? I doubt it. I doubt it. It would be great if they did, but I don't think they will. Now, how much of the Amtrak's $22 billion in state of good repair money out of the IIJA has been obligated? It's kind of a trick question. The answer is all of it, because once it's transferred to Amtrak, it's transferred. It's not like it's held in reserve and dripped out. When Amtrak gets that money, all of it is obligated. So now you'd have to go through a legal process to get that money back. Could they attempt that? Yes. But I go back to the slide a few slides ago about debt limit and immigration and tariffs and all of the other things that are on the agenda, which kind of make that less appealing as a place you want to spend your political chips. I also want to point out on this slide, if you look at all these items, these are the things that President Trump has said he wants to do. If you look at the dots will tell you which things he can do all by himself and which things he has to get cooperation to execute. I would point out that there's only two things that he can genuinely do unilaterally. And he did one of them yesterday, exit the Paris Climate Accords. He signed an executive order yesterday saying we're exiting the Paris Accords. Doesn't need Congress to do that. Unlikely to face a legal challenge, so that's done. And he can reverse the Biden administration's limits on certain energy projects. That's done. The rest, he's going to have to get Congress to go along, or he's going to have to go to the courts to enforce it because they're going to face a legal challenge. I say all that because there was a case that was decided in the Supreme Court last year called Loper-Bright, which took some of the power away from regulatory agencies to say how things should be done. I'm taking a very big case and kind of boiling it down here. The crux of that case, though, is that the courts are saying that we are going to interpret stuff if Congress doesn't. And so that kind of checks the authority of the Federal Railroad Administration and potentially the Surface Transportation Board. But if you're going to apply those principles as the Supreme Court said they would, what that really means is Congress needs to act. They want Congress to say clearly, this is what we want. So now let's go back to that slide that I showed you a few slides ago about those majorities. That's where you're going to have to do that work. I'll go back to that. I'll foot stomp that point again. Those majorities are not working majorities. You're going to have to get into something negotiated in order to do that. Very quickly, part the non-federal match. Democratically controlled legislatures have really sort of driven the non-federal match. That's going to start to go away, we think, because we've got a lot of legislatures now that aren't necessarily interested in ponying up non-federal match. Senate race in 26. Look at this map. I don't see a lot of vulnerable red senators necessarily. However, if the tariffs hit the way we think they might, if avian flu rips through the United States and eggs cost $30 a dozen, all of the other things that potentially could happen, you could see a shift in public sentiment, and you might see a shift in the odds for these seats. And if history is a guide, even if the Senate doesn't flip, it is likely that the House in this round will lean blue. So let's talk briefly about the economic case for passenger rail. That is an old ad from Amtrak, which they stopped running and which is now kind of flushed down the memory hole. And I wish they wouldn't. I wish they would actually use it, but they backed off that idea. But if you look at what Amtrak does for the economy, the fact that we have an Amtrak at the time contributed $7.4 billion to the US economy. That number now is somewhere around 10 billion, between 8 and 10 billion, depending on how you count it. That's a pretty good return. If I spend $3 billion a year to have an Amtrak and I get $10 billion of GDP out of it, that's a pretty good deal. And one of the things we're trying to make sure people understand, especially those 60 new congressmen, is that passenger rail is Heartland America's prosperity engine. That's what it is. Small towns all across America collect Amtrak's profits. Whenever they say, well, Amtrak doesn't make a profit, Amtrak makes a wildly enormous profit for all the communities that it serves. That's what it's for. It doesn't make a profit for Amtrak. It makes a profit for the communities that get the service, which is where this comes in. I know everybody here knows what this map is. Prosperity engine throughout the Midwest and elsewhere. I'd like to call your attention to the slide. If you look at the growth on the left-hand side, those bar graphs, that shows you the economic activity that is generated by just the operating spending on the new corridors. That's an estimate of how much additional economic activity you would get from doing that. This number understates the actual economic boost because it only counts direct effects. If you add in the indirect and the induced, you get up to at least 4 times that number. So that's a very sort of puzzling thing until you stop and think about what a train does and how it behaves. You get on a train, you go somewhere, you get off the train, what do? You stay in a hotel or an Airbnb. You go to restaurants, maybe you see a show, maybe you spend some money in a shop. So you go into a community and you take money out of your wallet and you leave it behind. And that times however many passengers a day is how you generate these returns, because that's the direct spending that's counted there. But go a little further. If I spend the money in the hotel has to spend money too, right? They have to have staff. They have to buy food. They have to have housekeeping services. So they put that money in the local economy by hiring staff and doing business-to-business transactions to bring food and supplies into the hotel. Those in turn induce sales tax revenues and payroll tax revenues. and all the rest. And it moves through the economy and it generates multiples of economic activity. And that's the magic of this kind of investment. We modeled this out for a lot of different folks, including the Borealis before it was called the Borealis. In 2021, we had projected $7 million in new visitor spending for the Borealis, saving $32.5 million on highway maintenance, because you're pulling cars off the road, traffic accidents being reduced $1.8 million, and operations and maintenance, $47 million. That's real stuff. Some other things that we can use to talk about the way forward on passenger rail post-election. The long distance study that the FRA led, that was sent to Congress yesterday. In the waning hours of the administration, they transmitted that report to Congress. They outlined 15 preferred routes for further development. If you were to do all of them, it would increase long distance service in rural areas by 43%. You'd get 102 new stations in small communities like this one. You would increase the number of people with access to Amtrak by tens of millions. And I go back to this. On the left side, that bar that you see on the right side of the left part of the chart, that's actually bigger. And it's bigger potentially because of this. Because if you add 15 new routes, you double capacity in the system, and you double the number of people using the trains, and you increase the number of educational institutions, people using it to get back and forth to colleges, to move in and move out, national parks, medical centers, military facilities, posts and forts and Air Force bases and so forth. That's where you're going to see a lot of growth and development. There were a few places I could have talked about corridor ID and a few others, but we are pressed for time and we have other speakers who will cover those as well. So I'm going to stop it here. I don't know if we have time for
We have a couple
questions.
minutes, so
Okay.
we have a question or two.
I'm happy to do that, and then I'll hang around after this for the folks here in the room as well.
Right. If you have a question for Jim, you want to raise your hand. Or we have enough people online too that we may not see you. So if somebody has a question, you can unmute yourself and just speak up too. Or we'll continue to move along. And I do want to mention we are recording this and we'll make that available later. And we do have the PowerPoint slides, so I don't think any of our speakers will object to us making those available as well.
Good.
So,
If there's
all
no
right.
questions, I will give up my seat.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And we are going to move to a remote presentation now, I believe. And Mark, could you clarify that Mike Rogers is online and ready to go? Mike, are you there?
Hi, Scott. Mark here. I do have Mike on. I just made him a co-host. So hopefully he should be on here.
All right, so well, speaking of, and I will encourage you if you're interested, Rail Passenger Association doing some great work in Washington, and it's had a big effect on things like the bipartisan infrastructure law and the programs we're enjoying now. So keeping things up to date. And we're going to move into one of those areas that we're seeing some economic activity and a lot of local investment, and that would be St. Paul Union Depot, which is owned by Ramsey County. And we have with us Mike Rogers from Ramsey County, and we're going to turn it over to him now for a brief presentation on what they're up to.
All right, just want to make sure everybody's able to see the screen.
We're seeing it from our end.
All right, so thank you guys for having me. My name is Mike Rogers. I am the Deputy Director of Public Works for Ramsey County. And as Scott had mentioned, Ramsey County, through its Regional Railroad Authority, does own Union Depot in St. Paul. So I just wanted to talk to you a bit about that, where we are with that and where we see things going in the future. But first, let's get this to jump. Thought it'd be important just to kind of level set with where is Ramsey County? What is Ramsey County for those of you who may not be familiar? Ramsey County is part of the 7-county metropolitan area of the Twin Cities. There's 3.7 million people here. Ramsey County itself is the smallest county in Minnesota, but it's also the most densely populated. In our 18 cities and one township, we have 550,000 residents, 330,000 jobs, and by 2030, that 550,000 residents is going to go up by 77,000. So Twin Cities area is a growing region, which is always a good thing. And with that, we need to make sure people can move around. So one of the unique things about Minnesota that some of you may have heard about, but others may not have, is that in the early 1980s, the state authorized through state statute 398A, the creation of regional railroad authorities. So these are subdivisions of the state. They are not a part of the county per se. They're a separate subdivision, and they have very broad power. So in 1987, Ramsey County created its own regional railroad authority. At that time, it was really to do transit planning and to acquire some abandoned rail right-of-way. So those powers allow you not only to acquire railroads, but to operate railroads. You can do rail transit development in the 7-county Twin Cities area. You can do bus rapid transit development. That's not something available to outstate rail authorities. We can buy property and we can levy a property tax to help pay for these things. And one of the unique things about the buying property side of it is we can buy property outside of our county. We do not have to be limited just to things within Ramsey County. So Ramsey County specifically has used its rail authority primarily on the transit and passenger rail side. We have been using our rail levy as well as a sales tax that the county controls, not the rail authority, to fund half of the cost of Green Line, light rail between the downtowns, to fund half of the cost of Gold Line between St. Paul and Woodbury. And then we've been doing project development work on Purple Line going towards the northeast and Riverview, proposed corridor to connect downtown St. Paul to the Airport and Mall of America. On the passenger side of the world, we've done the East Metro Rail capacity studies. Those were done about a decade ago, and basically looked at how do we get all of these passenger trains into Union Depot that everybody wants to come in here, knowing that we're on a very congested freight network. We looked at Union Depot itself. How do we acquire this property? How do we put it together to make sure we have a hub? We've purchased some abandoned rail right-of-way, as I mentioned, and then we provided some initial funding to MnDOT when they were a little bit more strapped for cash to do the Twin Cities, Milwaukee, Chicago, so the TCMC early analysis. In addition to those studies, we've done advocacy work with the Great River Rail Commission. Kevin Roggenbach is on this call as well if there's specific questions about the Great River Rail Commission. He is the lead staff on that for Ramsey County. We've advocated for the Twin Cities, Milwaukee, Chicago trains, and then the state rail plan as well. So when we think about Union Depot, many people are familiar with this picture of the depot, kind of that front head house area. This is the third version of the depot. The first 2 versions burnt down and were closer to the river. So then all 12 railroads got together to build the new depot. It was completed in 1924, had 282 trains and 20,000 passengers a day at its peak. It is fully on the National Register of Historic Places right now. The interesting piece is that only the front end was on when Amtrak left in the early 70s, and the back end didn't come on until 2014 when the whole building was remodeled and renovated and brought back into transportation service. That back end was used by the post office essentially as cold storage and a loading dock until Ramsey County acquired it. So the rail authority for Ramsey County assembled the 33 acres that make up Union Depot. Between 2005 and 2010, there was a big analysis done of where to put this transportation hub along the riverfront in St. Paul. Ultimately, the depot property was selected. It did need to be purchased out of multiple private owners. It did need to be renovated. We were fortunate with how funding showed up from the federal government and that we got about 125 million from the feds, a little bit of money from the state with bonds, but also the county put in 105 million through its rail authority. So again, having that property tax is a significant benefit to the county to be able to move big projects like this forward. Union Depot, as Ramsey County completed it, it was not just about passenger trains. It was about transportation as a whole. We wanted to make the building very successful and have activity throughout the day. So it was focusing on just the sole Empire builder wouldn't give us that. We went beyond the builder and said, let's bring transit in here. Green Line goes there, number of local and express bus routes, a number of intercity buses like Greyhound and Jefferson Line serve the depot. We also put in facilities for pedestrians and bicycles. There's Hertz rental car and a significant amount of parking on site. So again, trying to tie all those uses together to provide all-day activity. The other way to provide those all-day activities, making sure your building's fully leased. So we have Amtrak offices, we have Amtrak ticketing, we have an on-site restaurant, 1881, we have a bookstore, we have Choo Choo Bob's, lots of different things that people can come to day, as well as meeting space so that private entities, whether it be business or people saying, I want to have a wedding here, you can book rooms, you can book the waiting room to keep that activity going. We also sponsor a lot of events for people. The primary ones are the European Christmas Market, CPKC Holiday Train, North Pole Express, that brings in north of 170,000 people a year into the depot. We have train days in the summer, that's another 15 to 20,000 people, and then the Doggy Depot happening around this time of year with the St. Paul Winter Carnival is about 5,000 people. So those are the big events, but there's other events that are going on constantly in the depot as well. And then the final piece that is easily forgotten is because of how all of this property was assembled, the head house was in private ownership. We had to buy it off of a developer. This was in 2008, 2009. They were going under. They had converted a number of spaces within the head house itself into condos. We did not purchase those 39 condos. So within the depot itself, we've got a whole bunch of Ramsey County owned space, but then 39 private condos that are home to people. So that it's kind of a unique situation where you always have that activity. You have pets, maybe a dog's barking. It just feels very random at a train station, but also very life-giving and very interesting to just say, oh, look at this. This is somebody's home as well as somebody's way to get around. So looking forward, where do we think the depot is going to go? And what are we doing on the passenger rail side? In 2014, the builder service returned to Union Depot. That was a ton of work getting the freight railroads together to make sure we could tie into their existing network. That wasn't near as hard in 2024 to get Borealis here because the freight side was settled. It was more of negotiating with Amtrak's in the States to say, how do we account for this train coming to the depot? It's now going to spend the night at the depot, meaning it needs to be plugged in, it needs to be watered, it needs to be serviced. How is all of that handled? What types of agreements are needed? So that took a lot of time, but I think at the end of the day, getting the TCMC Borealis service in place was just an absolute win for the depot. It's definitely added a ton of people to the building and made things a lot more active. And that's why as a county, we are definitely interested in doing our part to help future service like the Eau Claire service, the Milwaukee-Madison Eau Claire trains, any third train through TCMC, NLX to Duluth. MnDOT is looking at how to connect the two downtowns, which could give NLX a route to get to the depot instead of just stopping in Minneapolis. And then thinking about those long distance Amtrak trains, whether it's North Coast Hiawatha or the very long distance trains being the Phoenix, San Antonio, and Denver. Just all of those additional trains will bring more life into the depot and make things that much more successful. But to get there, we also need to make sure that we are investing in the facility itself. So we know there's a lot of things within the building and then there's things on the track that need to be addressed. So we budget about $10 million a year to operate the depot. And that takes care of a lot of the day-to-day and ongoing needs, but it doesn't allow you to jump on things immediately. So in December, both the rail authority and the county each provided $3 million to put a total of $6 million out there to take care of some more immediate needs. Things that just aren't rising to the top, but we know we needed to do. And this was an opportunity to provide some additional funding for that. Flood mitigations on the list, updating the conference rooms. They haven't been updated since 2012 when the building initially opened. Technology has changed, furnishings have changed. So to get those updated, we've done that. To say get that done this year, get to work on it. Things like what's shown in green on this slide, extending track 3. Currently, track 3 is a stub end track. This would allow through movements on it. This would greatly assist trains like the Borealis by allowing them to park on this track instead of the tail track. which would just get them additional flexibility as well as us at our facility, additional flexibility should Amtrak's Empire Builder arrive late or additional third trains show up or North Fork Pole Express are there. West Terminal Lead extension is essentially extending the West Terminal Lead by about another mile towards the Science Museum of Minnesota. That just gets the passenger trains out of the freight network and allows for that flexibility and fluidity needed to more efficiently run the network for both the passenger and freight side. Long term, we're looking at connecting our tail track, which is on the east end of the property, into the BNSF railway as it heads up the hill and out towards Eau Claire. And the big reason for that is to allow passenger trains from the north to come into the depot without going through the Division Street Y and interacting with Hoffman, as that area is 5% of the nation's freight volume. And anything you can do to keep passenger and freight trains out of each other's way there makes everything work better for everyone. And while we haven't identified any other specific projects, we're always looking for other ways we can assist on the freight network to make sure that it's easier to get passenger trains into Union Depot. Some people may say, okay, where's all the money coming from this? And I mentioned previously the sales tax, or the property tax. That's one source of funds. We also have a countywide sales tax, and that countywide sales tax goes to transit and passenger projects, as well as some roadway and multimodal improvements. And we originally had set aside about $730 million for the Riverview corridor, which was that corridor from Union Depot to the Airport and Mall of America, thinking that that would be a streetcar. It's now not going to be a streetcar. So Ramsey County has said, that's fine, Metro Transit, you can go and do the project you want to do, but we don't need to fund it anymore because we're not going to fund a local bus improvement. The county board in December directed staff to come back at the end of March, early April with a plan for how to reallocate that money. And the general categories that they put out there were transit, multimodal investments, railroad improvements and expansions, property acquisitions, and then transformative infrastructure. So this allows the county to have a lot more flexibility with how it's going to spend its money. And this money would be spent countywide. It wouldn't be focused on just, say, St. Paul or one of the suburbs. It would be spread around the county, do all sorts of investments. And passenger rail is one of the things that the board wanted to continue to advance and get more service. So the final thing I'll leave you with here, and I know I'm running short on time, is that the importance of having Union Depot, or importance of creating a hub, is that it's all about a destination. Size does matter. You've got to think about all the things you need to accommodate, whether it's long distance trains or just regional trains. What multimodal improvements do you want to have there? Having separate track is critical for operational flexibility and allows you to get off the freight network so that then your relationship with them is that much better. There's thinking about this as more than just a train station. If all you are is a train station, people are going to be there at 1 or 2 times a day, and then it's going to be very empty. So think about how to make this a gathering spot for the community, how to program your space, how to make it so people who wouldn't normally ride a train or transit would come to this building to see the value of it. So then you'll have their support going forward, even if they never decide to set foot on a train or a bus. And then ultimately, financially, these things are expensive. It's more than just the initial capital outlay. You've got to be ready to spend a lot of money to maintain the building. Otherwise, it starts to deteriorate, and then that just snowballs upon itself. So with that, I think I'll turn it back over to everybody. Here's some contact information for myself. I'm sure Scott can make this presentation available as well. And I don't know if there's time for questions right now, Scott, or if we need to roll right into the next presentation, but thanks again for having me.
Thanks so much, Mike. And it's great to see the investment and the destination for future service from our region. I do see Andy Hawk raised his hand. So why don't we take that question quick and move on to the next thing. So Andy, do you want to just unmute yourself and ask your question?
I sure do. Mike, Andy Hawk, I represent the train crews on that Amtrak train.
Yeah.
That comes up there. Is there a snowball's chance we could park that train next to the depot rather than that stub track? It's getting a little hairy out there.
Yeah, I know I've been reached out to by, I can't think of his name offhand. Oh, I'm blanking on it, but it's the union rep for you guys. And we're going to talk about other opportunities there are for that. I know when we specifically talked to Amtrak, it was to put it out on that tail track, but we do not see that tail track as the long-term location for it. It's why we would like to get that third track extended. just because that tail track we want to have for other things, and it doesn't need to be a day-to-day spot. But yeah, I get what you're saying, Andy. It's not necessarily the greatest spot to have it.
It's for servicing especially, I think it would be better. I believe they only have one person servicing that train. And kind of a lone wolf thing. He's out there in the woods. That's
Yeah.
only going to grow up out there. That's a little spooky out there.
Yeah. So
All
yeah,
right,
it's
thanks,
something
Mike.
we're aware of, and we'll keep working on.
All right, well, thanks for that question. And Mike, we appreciate you joining us today, and we're going to keep on moving. One of the aspects of us going strictly online, but hosting it here, is we're keeping the schedule. We're going to try to wrap up around 10:15 this morning, so we're going to have to go a little bit faster than we had originally anticipated. So let's see, I am working on sharing my screen. And waiting for it to come up. There it is. So we're going to move into information about the Rail Coalition and our work to get passenger rail service to West Central Wisconsin. And again, here's some of the information about the Rail Coalition. Here's where we are on our schedule for today. We just heard from Ramsey County. We're going to spend a little bit of time, and I got a couple of people joining me to talk about what's happening to get passenger trains to West Central Wisconsin. We're going to hear from Dan Bilka about all of Ford Northwest, and we're going to get updates from Minnesota and Wisconsin DOTs. So we're going to talk about the Eau Claire to Twin Cities passenger rail corridor right now and get a little bit into that. But this is not Eau Claire or Menominee. This is a picture from across this summer, the Borealis. Some of you have heard about the Borealis, the train that started last May. This is the ribbon cutting with the governor and the Secretary of Transportation and the president of Amtrak. And the Borealis runs this route that you see the railroad tracks between Chicago and the Twin Cities. And you do see a dotted line there to Eau Claire, Madison, and Rochester. That part has not yet started, but we are hoping to see shuttle services to reach the Borealis. Article way back when, really strong ridership, not only in the first month of service, but we heard more about this later, that there's been strong ridership all the way up until now in terms of the Borealis. We want to talk about bringing passenger trains to West Central Wisconsin. And here's a picture of a passenger train stopping in Eau Claire. And you can tell by the way people are dressed that it wasn't recently. The last train to stop here was in 1963, and this was clearly not much before that. But starting in the late 90s, as Wisconsin got more active in passenger rail development, and we had the Midwest Regional Rail Initiative, some of the far-sighted leaders from our region, some of those names of companies you might recognize, Owen Ayers, who founded Ayers Associates engineering firm, Bill Leinenkugel was president of the brewery, Ray Willoughby, a local banker. We started as a committee of our regional economic development organization, Momentum West. Came up with this mission, which continues to be part of it, that we see passenger rail service for the economic benefits it will bring to our region. So why passenger rail? We think it'll attract and retain business and talent, great alternative to driving, accelerating economic growth, improving quality of life, and increasing tourism to our area, as well as adding resiliency to our transportation system. We look around at other places that haven't. You heard some things about benefits from Jim Mathews. Had a chance in 2023 to visit Normal, Illinois, Normal, Bloomington, mid-sized Midwest city with a state university, tremendous benefits from passenger rail there. We've seen Brightline and innovative service in Florida. And then the Borealis, Jim talked a little bit about the benefits that they had calculated there. And Wisconsin and Minnesota are looking at significant economic benefits for starting that service as they talked about getting it going. And then one other thing that's worth noting is that Missouri DOT did a study of their support of the St. Louis, Kansas City service. If you know the politics of Missouri, they are not a blue state. They're very much a red state. And their DOT found that for the investment that they're putting in that service annually, they're getting back $22 million in direct tax revenue, but $208 million in additional economic activity. And one of the things going on in our area, and that we look as a selling point is that Department of Administration report just came out from Wisconsin, and they predict Eau Claire as being the third fastest growing city and county in Wisconsin over the next 25 years. So how might it bring us to passenger rail service? And this is another form of the chart that Jim showed earlier, that the investments in the bipartisan infrastructure law and passenger rail significantly more going forward than occurred over the last 10 years. And it created a pipeline of passenger rail service development called the Corridor ID program, which starts with being recognized initially in scoping, moving into service development plans, and finally actually implementing service. In the first round of that, these lines that you see on this map were the corridors that were awarded to be in that program. And this is the map from the Wisconsin State Rail Plan. We're going to be hearing from WSDOT a little bit later, but you can see that the Eau Claire to Twin Cities route is part of two potential services, Eau Claire to Twin Cities alone, and a through service from Chicago and Milwaukee. So how do we see us getting passenger rail service in this area? One would be to get a shuttle to the Borealis at Toma, which we'd like to see, might be the soonest thing we can see happening. We're working on the Eau Claire to Twin Cities regional service, and there is work being done on a Chicago to Milwaukee, Madison, Eau Claire service, which we'll hear about a little bit later. And one of the things that we moved forward on in 2021, the Rail Coalition has been around many years as an advocacy organization, and a lot of organizations involved in it, and a lot of encouragement from local governments. And in 2021, those local governments decided to get together under state statutes and create the Chippewa St. Croix Rail Commission, including 3 counties and 6 municipalities. They passed joint resolutions to get it going. Basically, the corridor from Eau Claire to the Twin Cities, the Wisconsin side of it, and then invited as ex officio members the host railroad, Union Pacific, the DOTs of both states, the 2 Minnesota counties, the West Central Wisconsin Regional Planning Commission, and our 5 institutions of higher learning. And then they invited the Rail Coalition to become a voting member of the commission. So the commission, when the Corridor ID program was launched, submitted an application to be part of it, which was accepted. And so it is now in that program. And this is the cover sheet from that application. And we really have these aspects as key to the application that the commission put in. Naturally, the whole point of this is to meet transportation needs, but we have a few unique things. One is to have a competitive selection of the operator, not necessarily Amtrak. We'll talk about that in just a moment. A direct access model with the host railroad, Union Pacific, negotiated as if you were a customer, freight customer, to make it attractive for the railroad, but also to get some benefits back from that. To consider zero emission equipment. We have looked at that. That's not necessarily something we do, but we had one manufacturer approach us about that. And then getting to those economic benefits to have sufficient frequency to be able to have transportation of and development around the station sites. So we want to bring in a couple people to talk a little bit further about this. And we are talking with Union Pacific about something called a direct access model. And we do have Vic Stone with us from UP, who is, I believe, on the line. And Vic, if you want to unmute yourself and maybe turn your camera on if you can, and just give us some background as to why UP is supporting our application, what the direct access model is all about.
Sure thing, Scott. Can you all hear me okay?
You can.
Hey, thanks for having us. Yeah, it's just Scott had mentioned, Union Pacific is certainly willing to partner with passenger entities that in areas that make sense for us. This is certainly one of them. The West Central Coalition, of which we've had a good relationship with Dave Christensen, who I see on the line, and Scott, of course. In addition to our friends that have worked very hard at St. Paul Union Depot, so Mike Rogers and Ramsey County. You all have proven to be good partners and certainly willing to work with us. So that is exactly the approach that we advocate. And one of the things that we do want to mention here is this direct access model, like Scott just mentioned here. It is it is where the railroad, the host railroad, in this case Union Pacific, negotiates directly with the passenger entity that would like to run the service. That entity would then basically pick an operator, like Scott had mentioned, and we would negotiate with the passenger entity on rates and measurement metrics. We would also advocate for a limited term agreement, so the amount of trains, the service, the costs of operations and maintenance, so to speak. There's advantages, of course, to the freight railroad in this, but the advantage to the passenger entity is that um, obviously you can have a competitive bid for service, and equipment is something that a third party operator might be able to provide you, or the state agency themselves might be able to procure and have on their own. That's always a good thing, to be in control of your own equipment and have basically, as I said, a competitive operator and maintenance plan with that. Uh, at the bottom there, it says benefit host railroads. Just like I said earlier, we can negotiate with the passenger entity on operations and maintenance. Certain lines are subject to pretty costly maintenance. I don't anticipate this being one of those, but we do want to talk to whoever the passenger operator is going to be about those types of terms. So that would be a direct conversation between us and the passenger entity. So those are kind of the direct things that we think are an advantage to having that direct agreement. So as you see here, quick overview of the line. It's about 90 miles between Eau Claire and St. Paul Union Depot. It does have PTC, so that is a good start. It does not have CTC yet, but that would be something we would suggest as an improvement on this line. It has pretty good class track conditions. There will be some probably upgrades needed, a few things here and there, but not a lot of work, we think. We go to the next slide if there is one.
I think that's it of your
Does it?
slides.
Is that okay? Okay. All right. So yeah, just in quick summary, there it is. We look forward to working with the coalition. We certainly have attended a few commission meetings. Again, the approach that you all have taken is really, really good. We certainly advocate for that, and we look forward to being good partners in this corridor. So thanks for the chance to speak there.
All right, thanks, Vic. We're gonna move along because we do have a lot to cover, and we're trying to condense things a little bit. So Association for Innovative Passenger Rail Operations, we did mention that we're looking at competitive opportunity for operator the service, and we have with us Mason Baxter, who is with that trade association. So Mason, a quick update on what do we mean by a contract operator?
Sure. So first off, I'm Mason Baxter. I'm the Managing Director for AI Pro, the Association for Innovative Passenger Rail Operations. Some quick background. We've been around since 2010. Basically, we want to promote competition for the intercity market. Currently, there are 30 intercity operations within the United States. 29 of those are run by Amtrak, except for CT Rail in Connecticut. So we basically reformed in 2020. Then we were just operators. We expanded to labor unions, contractors, consulting groups, basically to try to cover the day as much as possible for passenger rail. And that group is always growing. We're looking at various other groups, more consulting groups to rolling stock manufacturers, to more operators, basically to increase the level of competition of what we see in the commuter market here in the United States. So who are our members? Just pretty quick. So our operators, we have Keolis. They're a French-based passenger rail operator. They're a subsidiary of SNCF, which is the French National Railroad. We have RATP Dev, a French operator. We have Transdev, their French operator, and then Herzog. They are a US-based operator. So Herzog is they have 19 properties, I believe, across the United States, ranging from a few streetcar properties, light rail to heavy rail, including the one intercity corridor run in Connecticut. Keolis is the largest private passenger rail operator in the United States by passengers. Here's an episode to kind of cover some of other locations where our members are at. These are just within the United States. If you go internationally, some highlights are some of our other members. Keolis, they run a significant amount of rail within Europe, but they also run like the Dubai Metro. RATP Dev is another good example. They run the RER system in Paris. So basically they run the French Metro. So we are operators, while you may not see their names on the side of the trains, they more than carry their weight when it comes to moving passengers. So kind of by the numbers here, so within the United States, just within the United States, so Keolis carries about 30 million passengers, roughly comparable to Amtrak, 17 million for Herzog, 2.1, and then 15.4 million for RATP depth. Internationally, we carry a considerably larger number of passengers. Keolis at 470 million, Transdev at 608 million, and RATP depth 1.5 billion. So we are definitely capable of running these operations. So when we talk about contract operators, what does that mean to answer Scott's question? Basically, what that is a state authority or an agency or, like you have here, would contract with one of our members directly to provide passenger service for you. So there's a few different routes you can go with competitive procurement. We think is the best way to go about selecting an operator. You have, what's fairly common, which is Amtrak just kind of comes in and provides your service, right? Your cruise equipment, everything you need to run a service. And I do want to clarify this point. We are pro-competition. We are not anti-Amtrak. We think they have a vital role to play in our national network. And we look forward to working with them going forward on how we can provide better passenger service across the United States. Some of our members do a considerable bit of business with Amtrak currently. So we're already working with them in various ways. One of the ways we go about providing these services is through our market sounding process. So we did that here with this group. It was a series of meetings, some of those in Washington, D.C., some of those in Omaha with Union Pacific. So I think we took part in some of those meetings, as well as Connecticut, Washington State. All this process is really bringing key stakeholders to the table. FRA, DOT, operators, labor consultants, really anyone you could think about that you would need to put on a new rail service, they would be involved in this. And basically, our main goal is encouraging these commercially negotiated agreements. Union Pacific has really been leading the charge in this area, and we definitely have been very happy to work with UP on this and Vic's team on that, building off some of the successes they're seeing with their commercially negotiated agreements for somewhere like in Illinois with Metra and the Rockford line. We think that's a model that can be utilized across the country for really speeding up delivery, bringing down capital costs for new services, getting services online faster. Some things we're still working on. I know rolling stock has been an issue for anybody who wants to put on a passenger rail service. I've been doing enough of these state DOT meetings, and that's the one thing every state's saying, we need rolling stock. And we're actively working on trying to find a solution in the short term, whether it be, getting equipment off lease or secondhand equipment while your final designs are being, manufactured, because that process can be quite lengthy. So that, and then we're already starting to talk about, surface transportation reauth and how can we, try to influence a policy to help with that issue. And I know we've been working with Jim and the RPA and various other groups on that as well. So I believe, correct, that might be the last slide. That's when we have one more. Yeah. So basically, what's some of the benefits of working with AI Pro? Open competition for your operator and maintainer. Maintenance wouldn't be an issue for this particular line because I believe UP said they would still handle that. You get your service tailored to you as an authority. What's important to you may be different to what's important to the Front Range of Colorado or what goes on in Phoenix. I can go and after this, I'd be happy to tell stories of where we've utilized that in the past with various members. We conduct these market soundings as part of this process. You get the whole scope of operators, and then they all bid for the service. It increases transparency. You understand where your money's going. I know that's been a challenge for some states in the past with their passenger services. They pay and, well, where's our money going? Well, we're not quite sure. Am I paying for my service? Am I paying for the national network? So, and no sole source procurement of operators. We get these services faster, cheaper. We've provided very high quality service tailored to you. I'm sure any of our members would be more than happy to host any of you at any of our properties. Times like this, we do operate in Miami. I'm just going to put that out there. And so, if that's an option, we're more than happy to host you at any one of our facilities. But we operate everywhere across the country, from MBTA in Boston to Trent Urbano and Puerto Rico to Miami to Southern California. So that's that's basically all I got from my end. I'll be around if anyone has any questions, feel free. If people need to email me after, Scott can forward you my email address, no problem. So that's all I got.
All right, this is an exciting part of this, and we're going to do a little musical chairs here because we're going to move on and keep rolling and keep going pretty fast. And we're privileged to have with us Andrew Jones today, who is with HDR Consulting. So a little bit of how this works is once we were awarded at the commission the FRA grant for a scoping process, we put out a RFP through Eau Claire County, our financial administrative representatives, and HDR Engineering was selected as our consultant who is working on this. So Angela is here, and she came out from Baltimore to be with us and really give us a quick update as where we are on the scoping process.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And I'm happy to be here, everyone. I'm happy to be in Eau Claire as well. I took a picture of my dashboard on the rental car, and it's -21 degrees. So I send you greetings. I'm going to get my throat and everything ready so I can go through these presentation slides. The first slide, as you can see on the screen, we have already gone through that, but again, it just kind of reiterates the route for the CID corridor, as well as the potential station areas that we will be looking at as part of the scoping process. Next slide. And so I'm going to put my glasses on so I can read my own slide, but what we're working on is the statement of work. And for some of you who may be familiar with FRA's program, for the CID, there is a 3-step process. For this particular corridor, we are in step 1. And so some of the highlights of what we're working on is the statement of work framework, which is an FRA document that then we take the statement of work that we're doing for the corridor here and putting in the necessary work that we are doing that would be part of the service development plan. Part of some of the highlights that will be in the statement of work is, as you all have mentioned, the direct access model. The FRA, I know in terms of them reviewing that's going to be something that's in addition to their language that we need to make sure that statement of work is explained properly in the proper places. And so we have that in the statement of work document that you will see as you're reviewing it. Then the third bullet, we talked a lot about coordination with stakeholders. The statement of work has 3 different parties that will be coordinating extensively for this project, including the railroads, the various communities, as well as even the stakeholders at this table and other audiences that will be coordinating. So it will be a very extensive coordination effort that we're scoping. And then the next to the last bullet, we talked a little bit about UP, and so I won't go into that, but there will be some efforts to coordinate the alignment as well as the operations through the various parties that are participating. And then the last bullet, the 2-step approach that this particular project that we're proposing on improvements, not just for the Eau Claire piece itself, as well as for the other railroad corridors, in particular the Milwaukee, Madison, Eau Claire, Twin Cities corridor that will be coming in. So it's a 2-step process with these particular projects and without these projects, and what that will be involved. And so where are we in this step 1? Again, there are 3 deliverables for step 1, the statement of work, which I talked about, and that's under review. We also will be submitting the project schedule for the service development plan, and that will follow the statement of work as well as the budget. And so those items will be coming in at the end of this month. And then they will be submitted to FRA, which we anticipate FRA will require a 2-month to 3-month process of review and approval. And so we're anticipating a date of March 28th or the end of March 2025 for the approval of those 3 submittals. think is at the end.
I think it is. So thank you, Angela. So that's where we are on the current study that's underway. So where we are, this is phase one or step one, if the correct terminology, I guess. And then you move to step two, which is a service development plan. And you'll be hearing more about this as we get past step one. That will require a 10% state or local match, and we'll all be working on what that looks like when we get there. Service development plan is the next step. It includes really, it's the big planning effort to get all those things done. And then we also have an effort among businesses, and we'll send these slides out to you later, where a number of businesses and organizations and chambers of commerce around the state have advocated or signed on to that statement saying, we think passenger rail service, sort of following along what Jim Mathews said earlier, that it's something that we should be considering expanding in our state to move forward and be able to take advantage of these things for our communities that Jim talked about and the value that it bring all across the state. So we'll talk a little bit about those state things in just a few minutes, but I'm going to bring in another speaker. And this is one of our out-of-state speakers. Dan Bilka is with us. He's president of a coalition called All Aboard Northwest. And Dan, thanks for being with us. You're from the northern states, so you're a little bit used to the cold.
Oh yeah, it's not the cold, it's the wind that gets you, don't you?
There you go.
So I'm Dan Bilka, co-founder and president of All Aboard Northwest, which is a region-wide passenger rail advocacy organization focused on what we call the Greater Northwest region, which is loosely defined as the Western Great Lakes, Pacific Northwest, I-70 corridor to Canada. So we cover a vast region, really trying to stitch together the Midwest of the Northwest. And we started out our Greater Northwest Coalition in 2019, just sort of as informal discussions across our region from Wisconsin, Minnesota, out to Washington State, Montana, Colorado, and Utah. Just trying to get on the same page of how can we actually see passenger rail progress today and not just get more studies that sit on the shelf. We're calling for the FRA to create a regional working group to really look at things at scales and scope most appropriate. In that we started All Aboard Northwest in spring 2022 to really try to be an official organization to really try to ensure that we have a full regional voice and regional perspective, that we don't duplicate, but we really supplement the great work that is already being done by groups like WizARP, All Aboard Minnesota, All Aboard Washington State. We're really trying to fill in the white spaces to really stitch together a true interconnected network. And that we really talk about passenger rail for what it does for the three E's we call them, the benefits of economic benefits, environmental benefits, and equity benefits. What really kicked off our work into more formalization there to really create All Aboard Northwest was this map that you're really well familiar out here, is the Amtrak Connectus map. But there is currently a big old void still left in the Greater Northwest region. They're west of here, west of the Twin Cities, but people live there too. It's saying that we should get on the map as well. This is our vision map, our working vision map. The yellow lines are the existing passenger rail services, and the blue lines are the new passenger rail connections that way. And all the blue lines, except for one exception, are existing legally secured railway rights of way that are there that we should be able to upgrade them and really, especially out this way, work for win-win benefits with hosting railroads. I will note that we still need to update the map to show service extending from Green Bay north to Marquette level. Then bringing on to the long distance study that through the IIJA that Congress has directed the FRA to look at both former Amtrak long distance routes along with the potential for new routes. This is how they split up the 6 workshop regions, and note that there are a couple or some states that are in both 2 regions as well. So such as North Dakota and South Dakota, where I'm from, are both Midwest and Northwest. So they're really recognizing nuances over geography. There's 4 primary criteria Congress has laid out when considering new long distance routes. They are link and serve large and small communities as part of the regional rail network, advance the economic and social well-being of rural areas in the United States, provide enhanced connectivity for the national long distance passenger rail system, and to reflect public engagement and local and regional support. And when they're considering travel flows in small and large communities, that they're looking at the travel flows not just for the largest of metropolitan areas, but really for some of the smaller ones as well. Come back to this in a sec. And this is the 15 proposed network of preferred routes that the team has come up with off of those 4 criteria, looking at linking serving large and small communities. Might be a little bit hard to see on your screen, but there are the light gray lines are the existing network nationally, and the colored lines are the 15 new long distance routes, really fitting in those 4 criteria, travel flows, and really stitching together a true national network. The one that you're most interested in is probably the Seattle to Chicago long distance service, sometimes colloquially known as the Northwest Hiawatha service. What this doesn't show for the stylization is that the project team was identifying what they call proposed or route alternatives throughout the route from Chicago to the Pacific Northwest, such as via Helena or Butte, Montana, and a couple places in Washington State. And we'll come back to this, but the key takeaway about all the long distance routes existing, such as in Cargogo today, it's not just for the largest of communities that can be served, it's also for the smallest ones that can reasonably be served. It's not from endpoint to endpoint, but the single seat ride in many overlapping city pairs, as well as the pronounced economic benefits, both direct and indirect, that we bring to the community served. Second route, as emulating from the Twin Cities down to Denver, is the route across South Dakota, which is really significant, not only because South Dakota is the only state in the lower 48 that's never yet had passenger rail service, but would be getting the full contiguous 48 states on it. The other one, our other one up in our region is Twin Cities to San Antonio route. And really wanting to hammer home the point on the long distance network and the long distance services is that regionality matters when we're talking about building coalitions. This is more sort of anecdotal knowledge, but with the passenger rail services and for especially long distance services, that they're for over regions, and that people in commerce readily travel over political boundaries, especially state borders, but there's often not the good mechanisms to really realize these services. So really trying to think about, as we're developing services, how do people in commerce work in our region? And again, with the long distance study, that they're really trying to recognize the nuances, that we have to break out the idea about the rigid state borders as defining characteristics. Such as out here, as I mentioned about the long distance Chicago to Seattle route, Northwest Hiawatha, that they're looking at routing alternatives in Montana, Washington State. So out here in Ontario, why shouldn't you look at that as well? If they're looking at the regional state supported service, potential state supported service, but also for long distance services, that there could be twin routes, especially in the Amtrak area. Just thinking that might be impossible, but there's actually precedent for that on the Eastern Seaboard with what's called the Silver Star Floridian service and the Silver Meteor that travels a lot of the same corridor, but then they diverge to serve parallel routings through the Carolinas. Like you can look at that out here as well to really add up the true network connectivity of interconnected routes. Really building up a whole national rail system.
All right, well, thanks, Dan. And we're going to come back to some other things in just a minute, but as I mentioned when we started, we're kind of moving right along because part of our moving to a different location is that we actually have to finish our whole program by about 10:15, 10:20. And so we're moving right along, getting everything done. We're going to go to our DOT updates now. So we're going to have Rich Kedzier with us from WISDOT momentarily, and we have to bring up his PowerPoint, and we're going to share that. So what we're going to do is we have Rich Kedzier with us from Wisconsin DOT, and then I believe we have Ray Mathews online from Minnesota. So we're going to try to get updates from both of them. So we're just going to ask them to be somewhat concise in moving through this, and lots of windows open here that I'm working on getting to. So get back to. Okay, so we're going to do a screen share for Rich. So it's my pleasure to introduce Rich Kedzier, and he is a passenger program manager for Wisconsin DOT. Let's push that button. Thanks, Rich. Appreciate your coming up from Madison.
Thanks, Scott. Yeah, we had an interesting morning leaving Madison. as Scott mentioned, my name is Rich Ketzier. I'm Wisconsin DOT's passenger rail program manager. And I will try to get through these slides. Here's my agenda. To save time, I'm not going to go through it, but we had a new train service start on May 21st. Some photographs. I was in Portage myself. I took that photo on the left. And then my colleagues some of my colleagues were in lacrosse. You see the governor, Amtrak CEO, Stephen Gardner, and our former WISDOT secretary, Craig Thompson on the left. Borealis, for those keeping score, we've had very, very good ridership since it started. And I would say, you know, having seen the pre-start forecasts, we're about 10 to 15% above the pre-start forecasts. I don't know if you can, Scott, are you able to see what those numbers are at the bottom? So a little over 123,000 passengers in July through December. I anticipate we'll probably finish the fiscal year at somewhere between 210 and 220,000 passengers.
Scott and Rich, I'm sorry to interrupt, but your PowerPoint slides are not advancing. Everybody's not seeing the power slides advancing. We're still stuck on the first frame.
We'll stop the share and start over again. It's funny because they've all been working up until now, right? All right, maybe we can try. I'm gonna wait for it to come up. Maybe we'll try it with the way
Without doing the
without the
slideshow.
We'll do it the way Mike did. Are you seeing him now, Mark? Mark, are you seeing him now?
Yes,
Okay,
I can
good.
see it.
Right. Okay. So as I was saying, a little over 123,000 passengers for the last 6 months of the calendar year. And, you know, we might see, you know, depending on how well our spring does, we might see 220,000 passengers for the state fiscal year ending June 30th. We also have another service that runs between Chicago and Milwaukee called the Hiawatha. Some of you might be familiar with it. That corridor doing extremely well. It was hit particularly hard during the pandemic because it has a very large commuter, work, home to work ridership constituency. And so it's taken a bit longer to recover from the pandemic than other state-supported routes that Amtrak operates. I anticipate for our fiscal 25, we'll probably have a bit over 700,000 passengers. So if for those that are familiar, we hit our peak ridership in 2019 at over 880,000 passengers. The positive side of not quite hitting that is we've had to experiment a little bit with fares. We've loosened up the fare structure, and we've adopted revenue management, which is dynamic pricing, somewhat similar to what the airlines do. And that has helped us really increase our revenue. And for anybody who's familiar with how states contract with Amtrak on providing the service, the revenue is really, really important because we only get so much money a year from the state legislature. We need that revenue to basically keep the service running as our ridership recovers. There's just a nice bar graph of our ridership trend. As you can see, still recovering from the pandemic, but I think our our recovery. We might not make 880,000 passengers in the next couple of years, but I think we will get there slowly over the next 5 years. Folks have mentioned the corridor ID studies. WSDOT is sponsoring 4 of them. Hiawatha expansion between Milwaukee and Chicago, Twin Cities, Milwaukee TCMC second round trip through La Crosse, Milwaukee, Madison, Eau Claire, Twin Cities, and we have some overlap with the Eau Claire to Twin Cities study, and then Hiawatha extension from Milwaukee to Green Bay. There are 2 other studies that are also going on in Wisconsin that touch on Wisconsin. Scott already mentioned the Eau Claire to Twin Cities study, and then we also have the MnDOT sponsored Twin Cities Superior to Luce study. I won't spend any time on this. Others have covered the corridor ID study process. We do have some improvement projects going on in Wisconsin. This one, Twin Cities, Milwaukee, Chicago projects, which are on both sides of the state line. Some work going on in La Crosse, track work to add capacity and fluidity for a CPKC in the La Crosse station area. MnDOT is leading some improvements in Winona and Red Wing. There's also CPKC will be doing some bridge work for the bridge over the Mississippi River. One project that's ongoing as well is the Milwaukee Airport rail station, second platform. This project is very expensive. It's roughly $22 million. And that is because we're building a pedestrian bridge over the CPKC corridor. If you ever have a chance to build a station, do your best to avoid adding structures and elevators, because that adds a lot of costs. We're hoping to complete this study in early 2026. This is a precondition to adding an 8th round trip between Chicago and Milwaukee on the CPKC corridor. The other precondition is the Muskego Yard bypass project. And we were just selected for a $72.8 million grant through FRA and the Christie program. And this will allow us to start construction, we hope, in 2027. Design work will start later this year, continuing into 2026. And as I mentioned, this project is securing funding is a precondition of adding the 8th round trip. We do not have to complete the project to get that 8th round trip going. With the completion of the Milwaukee Airport project in 2026, we are aiming to add that 8th round trip in 2026. And how we envision it is that Hiawatha will get its old time slots back that is linked to the Borealis, and then the Borealis will get a new schedule. As a complement to the Muskego Yard bypass project, we also have a FRA and state funded CTC project, vicinity of east and west of the Milwaukee Intermodal Station, and this will better control traffic in the vicinity of the station and help us route freight traffic out of the station area and through the Muskego Yard. And finally, We also have an ongoing equipment acquisition project. We were awarded a FRA Federal State Partnership grant to acquire 9 passenger cars, 6 venture coach cars, and 3 cab coaches that we're acquiring from Siemens. And we anticipate all 9 vehicles will be in service roughly April of 2026. And this will allow us to have 2 sets of new venture car equipment on our lot. And as well as replacing the aging and unreliable Amtrak F40 and PCUs, swap them out. Thank you very much, and hand it back over to Scott.
All right, appreciate it, Rich. Appreciate your moving fast. And actually our final speaker is the one we're really giving short shrift to, and that's Greg Mathews, I believe, is with us from MnDOT. And Greg, if you can possibly do it in about 8 minutes, we'd appreciate it. So I think
sure.
Mark, you have to share your screen.
Yeah, just me.
I think we were hearing you, Greg. So are you there?
Okay. Yeah. Is this
Go ahead.
sharing now? Okay. Okay. Great. I'll try and be quick. So thanks for letting me meet with you today. Hang on. So let's just start kind of recap where we are today. We've already talked about the Borealis in terms of our current services, intercity Borealis Empire Builder. You know, we also have the 1 commuter rail service here in the Minnesota with 3 daily round trips on weekdays and event service to Twins and Vikings games. And there are 3 tourist roads, Lake Superior, Mississippi, and then North Shore Scenic up in Duluth. And then Osceola and St. Croix Valley, which operates from Osceola, Wisconsin over to Marine and St. Croix, and then also over to Dresser. I know a few folks have talked about the FRA long distance study, and great to see that came out yesterday. Just a couple things I wanted to note on that is that most of the state DOTs did participate, that at least the Midwest ones did. And so, you know, WSDOT participated, MnDOT participated. So, you know, if this would ever come to fruition, we'd have 4 routes to or through Minnesota, you know, North Coast Hiawatha, Twin Cities San Antonio, Twin Cities Denver, and then Twin Cities Phoenix. And I think the main takeaway is if this would actually happen, it would result in a new hub in the Twin Cities. So, you know, that would really help with the route to Eau Claire and connecting it to lots of places across the country. So kind of looking ahead to what MnDOT's currently working on, we're in the process of updating our state rail plan. This new plan will include a vision, goals, and priorities for both freight and passenger rail. And this is really important because it's going to inform MnDOT's passenger rail efforts moving forward into the future. There are a number of things that we need to consider related to passenger rail in the plan, and that's really connecting communities in Minnesota and connecting Minnesota with the region. You know, we're also seeing, you know, growth and changes in travel demand, so that we need to be cognizant of that and be planning for that. You know, we also need to think about system capacity. We can't just, you know, busy rail lines, you can't just toss new passenger trains on them. Need to think also about reliability. You know, convenience. You know, one thing we hear about the Empire Builder, especially west of the Twin Cities, overnight is not a convenient time to board the train or try and get off and go to where you're headed. Also, safety and performance, and I'll talk about performance here in just a minute. And then, as a state agency, you know, we always need to look at how we can leverage investments in passenger rail to support accessibility, economic growth, and expanded mobility. You know, I think we saw a lot about the economic benefits of passenger rail. So draft plan should be out either late this winter or early spring, we're anticipating. And if you want to get involved, there's the link, or you can just type in Minnesota State Rail Plan in your browser and learn more about it. We're also working on a couple of things right now. I'm going to just briefly touch on the Twin Cities Fargo-Moorhead corridor. Back in 23, the legislature asked us to do 2 studies. First one was look at extending North Star commuter rail service to St. Cloud, And really the purpose of that study was to determine the steps and costs to develop, implement operating service extension from Big Lake, which is the current terminus, all the way up to St. Cloud. And I think that's about 30 miles. And so we looked at some low and high level service alternatives and assumed phased implementation to start service sooner. And looked at probably getting the service, if we would have started last year, service would probably start like 2036, 2038, depending on the scenario. Legislature didn't fund it last year, so no more progress in that, other than that we did submit the report to the legislature on mid-February of last year. And if you want to take a look at it, it's on our website. And then we're also doing a second study, which is we've been directed to look at a number of different things, but the primary purpose is to evaluate options for developing transit and rail service improvements in the corridor and including connections beyond. The legislation asks us to look at the route through Coon Rapids and St. Cloud. So that's what you can see the gray is the overall study here that we're looking at. And so I can't say a lot more about that, other than that we're going to be looking at a range of different options that for the legislation include both intercity bus as well as commuter and intercity passenger rail. And that report's due to the legislature on February 1st. So can't say a lot more right now because we're busy trying to get that finalized, and then but more to come here in about a week and a half. And then I want to just briefly touch on the Minneapolis Duluth. I think Rich touched on this with the corridor IDs. Just kind of a recap of our progress. We got our step 1 grant obligated in late March. The spring was developing a project management plan. We completed an FRA required gap analysis. The previous service development plan, that one was done in 2017. So we had to do a gap analysis of that to determine what needs to be updated or revised. And so there's a couple things, FRA guidance and requirements that change for service development plans. So we need to, do some updates and revisions to, in additions to meet those new guidelines. And then also conditions have changed. So we need to do updates to reflect current conditions. And then we did submit that. We prepared a scope, schedule, and budget over the fall. We got that submitted to FRA draft in December. And so we're going to kind of next step is to work with FRA to get that finalized and approved by FRA. And once that's done, then they would obligate us corridor ID step 2 grant, which is for updating that service development plan. And so we're looking at probably contracting and beginning that update over the summer. And then we'll jump back to the Twin Cities, Milwaukee, Chicago. Rich talked about a little bit about the improvements for the Borealis. So I think it's really important to keep in mind that CPKC allowed the Borealis to begin service before we complete construction. I think ridership's been great, but on-time performance hasn't been where we've wanted. And so, getting this construction done is really going to help. So I'll just briefly touch on this real quick. In La Crosse, we're going to upgrade the 2 crossings east of the depot. And then we're also going to add a second main. And then we're going to extend a yard lead west from the yard through the depot area. And so what that's going to allow us to do is get back to serving the historic platform, which is the covered one. That's going to be the platform will be rebuilt. I believe the canopy staying in place. And so you'll be able to use that platform once again. And then moving west, we need to update the Mississippi River Bridge. And then we're going to be modifying a curve coming off the bridge to the west of Minnesota here. And that allows freight train speeds to increase from 5 to 10. And that really opens up that slot space so we don't get passenger trains waiting for freight trains to cross the bridge. Also helps when barge traffic is active, that we don't get those bottlenecks there. And then in the Crescent, we're going to be upgrading a siding to a main line, adding some additional main line, and also building some additional sidings. And again, that allows a lot of the freight trains to get through on that route instead, opening up more space on the river route to get the passenger trains through. And then moving up to Winona, we're going to be upgrading, if anybody's ridden through or gotten on or off the Builder Borealis in Winona, you'll notice that you basically stand on a siding and there's little pads, grade crossings that you stand on to board the train, which isn't ideal. And so what we're gonna do is we're gonna upgrade that siding to kind of mainline speeds through town. I think that's like 35. And then we're gonna add power switches at both ends. So that's gonna allow the passenger trains to get over onto that siding. Amtrak's gonna be rebuilding that historic platform, so we'll actually have a real platform to board off instead of pads. That also provides space for freight trains to pass without in no decrease in the passenger train speeds, and also decreases the gate downtime for motor vehicles, which is kind of a win-win for everybody. And then on the north end of town, we're going to be adding some track at Tower CK, at where it ties in, where there's a junction with the Waseca sub. And so that is going to allow passenger trains to get past freight trains at this bottleneck a little bit more easily. And then at that area, we need to also do some grade crossing upgrades there. And then all throughout town where we're upgrading that siding, we need to do some additional grade crossing improvements. So last thing I'll mention, we're currently in final design. Construction should be 26, 27, although some of this work is going to be starting a little bit sooner. We expect that the work on the Mississippi River Bridge might actually get started here sometime this year. So I know it's quite a bit of information, but that's it. I know we need to get wrapped up. So I just want to say thank you.
All right. Well, thanks very much. Thanks very much, Greg, and apologize to everybody for having to kind of move along very fast, but I think we shared a lot of information today and we appreciated everybody joining us. We're going to go about 2 more minutes because we have to leave the room, but our bylaws at the West Central Wisconsin Rail Coalition call for an annual meeting in January. I think we might need to start thinking about moving it to spring, but the way our bylaws are set up, the way the organization runs is what we do at the annual meeting is elect our directors, and then our directors run the organization through the course of the year. And I'm just going to share my screen one more time. And you are seeing this, you're seeing a slide with the names of the current directors. The officers are then elected by the directors. And so we have staggered terms. Currently, Jackie Pavelski, Mark Quam, and Scott Rogers' terms are up in 2025. And I have sitting with me now Ann Schell, who is with Jack Hobleib, who are the nominating committee, and she has a couple motions to make.
Yes, representing the nominating committee, I would move that 3 persons that terms are up by Scott continue in their positions for the next term. And also that we honor our ability to add 2 more positions available, 1 more position available on the board, and
Jeff Abbott.
That's what happens when you get old.
Yeah.
Jeff Abbott has expressed interest, and we would nominate him for that additional position.
And those of you that are actually paid members, you did receive an email with minutes from the last meeting and that sort of thing. So if you're a paid member, we need somebody to second that motion. Seconded by Jackie Pavelski, who's in the room as the vice chair. Any further discussion? All those in favor, if you're a paid member, you can say yes.
Yes.
Anybody opposed? All right. And then I need a motion to approve the minutes from the last meeting that was sent out. All right. It's moved by Jim Dunning. Is there another? Seconded by Dan Schillinger. Any additions or corrections? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed?
Aye.
We know how to run a railroad here, so. We want to thank everybody for coming. We apologize it's a little bit shorter, but we're able to, glad that we could get our information across, and we particularly appreciate our people who traveled here. And it has warmed up to 14 below, and we're on our way above 0 today. So thank you for joining us, everybody. Thanks for Mark for running the meeting. And we'll be back in touch with everybody who registered to let you know about some of the accessing some of the visuals as well as the recording. So thanks very much and have a great day.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.